Okay, everyone, I just wanted to walk you through how to do a conclusion paragraph in your I Am Malala essay. So, when you are doing a conclusion paragraph, you will know it's obviously the last paragraph in the essay that your reader will see. There's three things it needs to do. It's going to remind the reader of your argument. Then it's going to do a quick review of your main ideas. Since you only had one body paragraph for this essay, those might be really similar. In that case, you may combine them into a larger sentence, or maybe two sentences, kind of mixing those two ideas, where you will restate your thesis and then kind of restate some of the ideas you talked about. And then finally, you're going to leave the reader with the importance of the essay. So why did they read this in the first place? That's going to kind of hit home with them. And we call that the clincher. And it goes in this order. So you restate the thesis, then review the main points, then you wrap it up with that clincher. The restated thesis is going to remind the reader what your main focus was. So that end of your introduction paragraph, you'll notice when we did the introduction paragraph, the triangle pointed downwards, and this time it's pointing upwards. So the thesis is kind of the same idea, you're just rewording it. How's that going to look? Well, you could use a comma to cut it in half and move the back to the front. That's one good idea. Find out where there's a break, where there's a dependent clause and an independent clause, or two independent clauses, depending on if there's a conjunction, like we learned in our comma slideshow a couple weeks ago. And then you take it and you switch it. So, and then you edit it and add a little more so it makes sense. Like this one, you can see the sample. Since activities are extremely important when it comes to refuge, it is essential that Khitam Ham uses sports to guide his happiness. They switched that second phrase, that independent clause, and moved it, and put the dependent clause at the end, and then removed the comma. So the blue is a dependent clause, which is not a complete sentence by itself, and the red is a complete sentence by itself. So they switched it. And then once you do that, when the independent clause is in front, you can remove the comma. So they switched it like, it is essential that Khitam Ham uses sports to guide his happiness, since activities are extremely important when it comes to refuge. So you can see how that kind of worked. You might want to change the words a little more, like I would say change the word essential to something else, and maybe extremely to something else. So you have those words that are really standing out. You can actually change them up a little bit. That increases your word choice variety and your overall score for your grammar usage. Then the review of key information. So within your body paragraphs, you provided your reader with some key information, right? You gave us some evidence, some main points, maybe some transitions from your claim. Those are going to be proving your thesis statement. Really briefly remind the reader of what those points were that you made. What kind of argument did you end up making? That's a really short one too, 1 to 2 sentences. And then the clincher is at the end. That's when you end with a thoughtful, kind of more creative, kind of speak right to your audience. And that portion reminds the reader of the importance of the topic, why they read it in the first place. And it should tie back to your grabber, so it creates like a nice rounded full circle effect. I think of it kind of like a hamburger sometimes. Like if you have the bun as your grabber on the top, you don't want to have a hamburger with no bun on the bottom. That's kind of slippery and icky. So you want to have another bun. They're made of the same thing, right? And so you want to have another kind of something similar to what you did in your grabber on the bottom of your essay, which is the last few sentences. And it should hit home, which is tapping into the emotions of your audience or getting them inspired somehow. So it goes in this order once again, but I put a little more detail in each one of these here to remind you of what each one of those should contain. And just to show you a sample, this is actually the sample essay we looked at earlier. So it is essential that, this is that thesis that I showed you, how he flipped it. And then he kind of restates that football was a sanctuary, and why, like he was able to interact with his friends, just a couple of the main points that were made in the body paragraph, and how that schedule helps Khitam keep himself organized. Sorry about the dog. And then at the end, they use a clincher and say, look, if he didn't have that, he would have fallen victim to these gangs on Compton. If you read that book, it's about a football player who's involved in gang violence in his hometown. And instead, he uses his refuge to guide his life choices and inspire others. And he found light in an area of darkness. So I'm going to show you really quickly the sample essay. oops, sorry. You can see if you looked at his intro, the title of his essay was called, sorry, what was the title of his essay? He changed it. It was called the Finding Light in the Darkness. And so he actually put that in his essay there. It's like right here. There is light, and this light is called, in this tunnel of darkness, this light is called refuge. So he mentioned this darkness and light metaphor in his introduction. So if you look, he kind of took that same metaphor that he used in his introduction and he used it at the end. So in his conclusion, whoops, sorry. In his conclusion, you can see that there is this same reference to that metaphor of the light in the area of darkness. So that's one example. Some people like to do a like if they did a quote for their grabber. I taught you guys how to use a naked quote for your grabber to like get the audience a little interested and maybe even a little confused enough to where they're going to read on. And you could do that at the end also. If you do that from Malala, like from the book, that's great. You don't have to worry about adding a different citation. You just use her name. If you went on the internet to find a like a quote to kind of inspire your audience, something related to refuge or something like that, you could do that, but you would want to communicate with me, and you would have to cite it, which means you'd have to find out the proper citation for that quote, whatever website you got it from, or if it's from another book or something like that. And then you would have to include another works cited entry also. So I don't recommend doing that because it's a lot of work and it's hard because I haven't taught you how to do that in class yet. If you really are set on doing that, then please email me the source that you used and I'll help you create the citation for that. All right? And that's how you do a conclusion paragraph.